because I had muted the microphone, but not the volume control. Like I said, this is the nothing is working right stream, so let's just get it over with. And what a perfect timing for a bot. Okay. I'm going to tweak that up just a tad. Okay, so as I was saying, yeah, I was trying to duplicate the book up on screen in some form, some fashion. Everything else, everything that I have that's designed to make this work was not. Um, the short version is Plan A didn't work, Plan B didn't work, Plan C didn't work. Then the camera failed. Then the other camera wouldn't work, but in the process of working on that one, the first one finally finished updating. In fact, the camera had to update. Why are we updating cameras now? Anyway, getting all of that in position. So the case of the Vanishing Boy, about a week or so, week and a half, I just had this vague memory of this book. I remembered this. It was this story of this likely orphan boy who ended up meeting this other family who had some kind of mental ability, and ended up meeting this other family with abilities, and that was it. And just in asking, and it was that whole thing of like, I was trying to do Google searches on this, and Bing searches too. Let's get that name out there. Um, I might have even tried a Siri thing, but in trying to find a like young adult fiction that was set in modern times is actually, I don't want to say it's hard to do that. I could not come up with the right search terms for doing it. A lot, it was always like, oh, here's, I was getting these like magical kingdoms, or this life on another planet, or just nothing that was anywhere close to the book I remember. Um, and so I asked on a couple of Discords, and it was funny because just the bit of asking um, sparked a couple more memories, um, and I could remember this one specific scene, and my brain went from the word teleporting, which is what I was focusing on, to vanishing, which is an interesting kind of idea in itself. The idea of describing the ability from the person who's doing it versus who's perceiving it. Um, but yeah, anyway, so I just suddenly got vanish, and just as I started to type that in, like my hands filled in the rest of the text of the the case of the Vanishing Boy. Um, and you can see it's had multiple covers. This is the one that I saw. This was the one that I read, that my local library had, and possibly read this too young. I don't know. That's one of the things that'll be interesting to find out. Um, uh, I don't know a lot about the author, other than wrote the Escape to Witch Mountain books series. Was there one book? But certainly, if this is one of those things where like this has secretly been a book of like Scientology or some other cult, please let me know. I would rather know than live in ignorance of it. As far as trigger warnings, I do remember there is a strong fear of needles from the main character. Might be some issues with medication, but more of consent around things rather than the things themselves. So, I thought it would be kind of fun, interesting to, instead of just reading it on stream or as a recording, just to give another way to share it with people and kind of see, kind of discover with the rest of you what this book meant to me. I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know how long this is going to take. For a digital book, it's got like 2,300 pages, but that's not always very long. Yeah, the other thing too is I wanted to get some practice just reading and speaking. Haven't gotten a chance to do that much lately, so yeah, let's go ahead and begin. Sorry, there's a part of me that keeps waiting for like. I tried to do this earlier, and just again with everything going wrong, things just kept failing. So I keep expecting to have something else break on me here, or get interrupted, or what have you. But I think we're finally through that, so let's take a look at The Case of the Vanishing Boy by Alexander Key. This book is for the quiet ones among us, whose abilities are seldom suspected, for they do not speak of themselves. Chapter 1. Flight. Jan sat motionless in his seat, staring blankly in front of him while the train, loaded with returning commuters from the city, sped impatiently through the deepening twilight. At the moment he had no idea why he happened to be on board, nor was he even aware of the small girl who had taken a seat beside him. "Is something wrong?" she said finally in a low, quiet voice. "You're not sick, are you?" It was several seconds before her questions penetrated the curious void in which he was momentarily lost. He then jerked around, startled, and blinked at her uncertainly. She was a frail little blonde person, neatly dressed in faded but fashionable jeans covered with embroidery. Curving around and hiding a good portion of her sensitive freckled face was the largest pair of dark glasses he had ever seen. One slender hand clung firmly to the top of a white cane. "No, I'm not sick," he muttered, wondering about the cane. "But something's wrong," she insisted. "You're in some sort of trouble." "Don't be nosy." The gruff words came out before he could stop them. The possibilities of the void seemed far better than the coldness of reality. Rebuffed, she looked away and did not speak until the train had discharged some of its passengers at the next station and was hurrying forward again. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I don't want to be nosy, but you are in trouble. I can feel it. Have you friends in Westlake?" Why do you ask?" "You bought a ticket for Westlake when you got on at Glendale. I know because you were right behind me when I bought mine, and I heard what you said to the ticket agent. I had a funny feeling at the time that you didn't know where you wanted to go, and that the only reason you said Westlake was because you had heard me say it." "Oh. Am I right?" Of course I'm right. That's why I decided I better sit down by you, because you might need help." She paused a moment, then asked, "What's your name?" He swallowed and searched wildly through his memory. "Bill," he said at last. She shook her head. "Bill doesn't seem to fit. You've forgotten your name, but maybe I can sort of remember it for you." Her cool, slender hand closed over his wrist. "Now, don't think of anything. Just let your mind go blank. And please, I know I'm being nosy, but it's not because I'm really that way. I simply want to help." "It's all right," he admitted. I'm sorry I said what I did, but I don't think you can do much for me." Resentment of her past. He looked at her with rising interest and curiosity, and was suddenly jolted by the discovery that her glasses were too dark to see through. If he couldn't see through them, then neither could she. She carried a white cane, and her eyes had always been closed whenever he caught a narrow glimpse of them from the side. "Yes," she said, as if easily picking up his thoughts. "I'm blind, sort of. But stop thinking of me. Don't think of anything." He tried to make his mind a blank, but it was very difficult under the circumstances. He was sure he had never known such a remarkable person. "You've got a name that begins with a sound like mine," she said presently. "Mine's Ginny. Ginny Rhodes. Yours starts with a G. No, it must be a J. It's a short name, but it isn't Jim or Joe. It must be Jan? Of course, it is Jan. But I can't get the last. It's all mixed up and fuzzy, as if there were several names and they didn't really belong to you. Why don't you go look through your pockets and see if you can find a letter or something that would give us a clue?" He searched through the pockets of his jeans and found only a pearl-handled knife, a bandana handkerchief, some small change, and $12 in bills. It wasn't much to go on. "Is this all you ever carry in your pockets?" Ginny asked, surprised. "Just a knife, a handkerchief, and some money?" "Why, I don't know. It seems like I ought to have at least a billfold. My brother Otis is only 5, but the stuff that comes out of his pockets would fill a wheelbarrow." She fingered the handkerchief and held it before her eyes a moment. "A blue bandana, and it's clean. I never knew Otis to have a clean one more than 5 minutes." "How can you tell the color?" "Oh, I can tell, even in the dark." "The dark?" "I can get along in the dark much better than the light. Daylight hurts. That's why I wear these special glasses." But you seem to see, even with your eyes closed. I don't understand." Neither does anyone else, though Pops is making a study of it. But let's talk about you, not me. Why were you in Glendale?" I don't know." "You must have been in a hurry to leave, because you'd been running when you came into the station behind me. You were breathing hard, and I could feel how scared you were." She paused, then asked, "Don't you remember any of that?" "All I can remember is buying a ticket to Westlake. That and being afraid I wouldn't catch the first train that came by. Are you still scared? He swallowed. I must be, because I feel all wound up tight, like something was going to happen. But surely if there was any danger, you must have left it behind. Just thank goodness my ticket book ran out when it did, so that I had to buy a ticket home. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gone into the station, and we wouldn't have met. Yes, my voice was catching on a couple of those lines there. There are things that are certainly starting to feel familiar here, though not from remembering the book. There's a lot about my life that's random coincidences, like very specific things that strange computer errors and happenstance and things like that. Now let's get back to the book. Sorry, I don't know if I turned the music way down, and I don't know if it's still playing on stream or not, but it's gotten to be a... Yeah, I can see you're still getting it just a little bit. Yeah, okay, fine. Fine music. I will use that as an excuse to talk. I have a really good memory for things, except certain parts. That might be why I was thinking of this book. Okay, let's see. Would have gone into station, we wouldn't have met. She frowned and said, "It's almost dark. Why would you have done... What would you have done if you had managed to get to a strange place, and dark had come, and there wasn't a soul you knew, and you didn't know where to go?" He shrugged. "I'd have managed somehow, and I will in Westlake." "Honest? The thought doesn't scare you?" "Not half as much as..." "As what?" I don't know. What were you doing in Glendale?" "I go there every Wednesday and Friday afternoon to study piano with the best music teacher in the world. Oh, I love the piano. But let's get back to you. A stranger can't go wandering around in a place like Westlake without being noticed and watched. There's no need for you to wander around. Pops always meets me at the station with his car, so you're going home with us." But you can't do that. He doesn't know me. You don't either. You don't even know what I look like." "I know exactly what you look like. You're not very big, 'cause you're only 4 inches taller than I am, and almost as skinny, except that you're awfully strong. And you've got black hair and high cheekbones like an Indian, only you're too pale for an Indian, so you must be Irish or French or something." He gaped at her. "I don't know how you do it with your eyes closed, but you sure hit it on the button." Reminder, this was written in 1979. As for your character, I trust you completely, and I'm never wrong about that, as Pops can tell you. And that's not all, she hurried on before he could open his mouth again. You've got a secret ability that's crazier than mine. It's terrific. I mean, it's really terrific. Why, Pops would give anything to study you. A sudden chill went through him. No, he gasped. Oh dear. Did I say something I shouldn't? I know you have an ability. A very strange one. I can feel it in you. But I don't know what it is yet. And I won't try to find out if you don't want me to. I don't want to be studied, he said grimly. She was silent a moment, looking at him. Jan? Yeah. Have people tried to study you before? I don't know. I just don't want to be studied, that's all. Oh, very well. I won't say a word about it to Pops without your permission. But you are coming home with us. I don't think I'd better. Jan, you've got to. If you're alone, the police at Westlake will know right away you don't belong there. They're sure to ask questions. What's going to happen when you can't answer them? Without waiting for a reply, she went on eagerly. Pops dotes on puzzling people like you and me, and he'll love to help you. I won't give you away to him, though, if you promise not to give me away to anyone else. Understand? No? What do you mean? The only people who know about my eyes are you, Aunt Hecuba, and Pops and Otis. Aunt Hecuba. There was a word I had no idea how to pronounce before. I might have gotten it right. I don't know. I have a feeling in my mind I just kind of scribbled over it. Everyone else, even my music teacher and our tenant family and his family, all think of me as the poor little blind Rhodes girl, and say I ought to have a seeing eye dog, which I don't need. Anyway, they and the police and the conductors on the train all sort of watch out for me. And I do need help at times, for I haven't any depth perception at all, not a smidgen. He wasn't quite sure what she meant by depth perception, and before he could ask what she was explaining, we have to keep it quiet about my eyes, because if it ever got out, I'd really be in the news, and that wouldn't be good at all. Because Pops is Heron Rhodes, and we'd lose all our privacy and be plagued to death by reporters and all kinds of kooks and connivers out for money. Pops, he's my grandfather, says it's much better to be poor and unknown than a rich celebrity who is always in danger. Is there some metaphor about Twitch there? I don't know. The train, as she was speaking, had begun to slow. Now he saw that the remaining passengers in the car were rising and moving to the front. The gloom beyond the window was suddenly replaced by a brightly lighted platform. Here we are, said Ginny, getting to her feet. All at once he felt trapped. Uneasiness crept through him. Peering out, he could see the cars parked around the station and two policemen moving determinedly across the platform. Just beyond them was a van where men in white jackets stood waiting expectantly. A chill gripped him. Come on, said Ginny, tugging on his sleeve. No. But you can't stay here. This is the end of the line. The train will be going back to the city. He stumbled into the aisle, but instead of following her, he turned abruptly and fled blindly to the rear of the car. His only thought was to escape into the night. That's chapter 1. So at this rate, we'll be able to get through a couple chapters here. From there, who knows? Chapter 2. Found. It was an electric train with 2 cars, and he was in the second car. Facts he was not aware of until he burst into the compartment at the rear and saw the empty track with its third rail beyond the window. The only way out was through the sliding doors on either side. Both were closed. He tugged frantically at the one on the right, which was away from the station platform. It would not budge. Whirling, he threw his weight into the other door. It slid back easily, and he leapt out onto the end of the platform and sped down the steps that led onto the track. Surprised voices and a sudden shout behind him gave wings to his heels. He raced between the rails, searching for an opening in the steel fences that rose high on either side. Dimly ahead he had made out a low place on the right where the wire did not meet a dip in the ground. He reached it just as a moving figure took form in the gloom beyond it. A light flashed in his face. A voice heavy with authority challenged. "Hey you! What are you doing here?" Jan dropped down in a panic, scrambled under the wire, and clawed onward into the utter blackness of weeds and brush until he was halted by a tree. He got up, trembling, and went stumbling blindly through a tangle of brush and woods. "I won't be caught," he gasped to himself. "I'll never let them catch me." Another tree on a downward slope stopped him with a jolt, and he fell to his knees, his head ringing. When his head cleared and he got his breath, he managed to stand again. But instead of going on, he stood still for a while, listening. No one seemed to be following him. Deciding he was safe for the moment, he slumped weakly to the base of the tree to take stock of himself. "What's the matter with me?" he wondered. "What am I running from? I'm afraid of something. But what?" Had he done anything against the law? Were the police after him? Was he a wanted criminal trying to escape? It didn't seem likely, for there was nothing in his pockets that he couldn't claim as his own, unless it was his $12 he'd found in them. Where had the money come from anyhow? Remembering Ginny, he began to wonder if he hadn't been foolish in running away merely because he had seen 2 policemen crossing the platform. Or had it been the men by the van? None of it made sense. All he knew for certain was that his name was Jan, and he was hungry. He must not have had anything to eat for some time, for his stomach was growling, and he felt weak and a little dizzy. The sudden flash and crack of lightning jerked him to his feet in alarm, and drove him down the slope in search for shelter. He could hear traffic ahead. Presently he found himself hurrying along a gravel path, with distant street lights and sudden bursts of lightning showing the way. The path took him to an alley behind a building. He reached the street beyond just as the rain began. Jan lowered his head and dashed for the first sheltered entrance he could make out. In the slashing downpour, he did not realize it was a small church until the door slowly opened and light spilled upon him. He shook the water from his jeans and faced the smiling scrutiny of a portly priest. "Well, bless us both. I did not know anyone was out here. Unless you were born a duck, come in where it's dry." Jan entered hesitantly. "You're scratched up a bit," the priest went on. "I assume you had a fall, but not a bad one. Are you all right?" I'm okay, sir." "I don't believe we've met before. I'm Father Dancy." I'm Jan, he replied, taking the priest's outstretched hand. Jan Riggs. The last name slid almost naturally from his tongue, coming so easily he wondered if it really could be his own. For some reason, he did not like it at all and wished he had thought of something else. Riggs, said Father Dancy. Are you a newcomer in town? Just passing through, sir. I got out to take a look around, and the rain caught me. Do you know where Heron Rhodes lives? Rhodes? Oh, you must mean Dr. Rhodes. He's a psychologist, I believe. He has a farm about 5 miles out of town. How can I find it from here? Well, this street in the front of the church runs straight through the highway going west. The Rhodes property borders the highway. It has a stone wall running the entire length of the place. The priest paused, eyeing him intently. Do you know any of the family? Just Jenny. Jenny? Oh, the little blind girl. She really and truly quite... Father Dancy stopped abruptly, his attention caught by something in the rain just beyond the open door. Now, what can Sergeant Bricker be wanting? I'm sure he isn't coming to confess anything. Jan glanced quickly through the door and chilled as he made out a figure in a raincoat coming around the side of a police car at the curb. He managed to control an impulse to dash madly through the church in the hope of finding some way of escape at the rear. Instead, he forced himself to say quietly, Father, I'd like to use the washroom if you have one here. Oh, yes, of course. Down the end of the aisle here you'll see a door on the right. The washroom is the second door on the other side. Jan sped down the aisle and made it to a small door just as Father Dancy stepped forward to meet Sergeant Bricker. He caught a glimpse of the two as he eased the door shut behind him, and then leapt down the dimly lighted hall and jerked open the first door he saw, to a tiny office lined with bookshelves. Behind the desk was a window, and to the left of it a narrow door, obviously used as a private exit. In seconds he was in an alley outside, staring in dismay at the building in front of him and the high wall to the left that prevented him from reaching an area behind the church. The only avenue of escape was to the street. It meant going directly past Sergeant Bricker's car, which he could see through the lessening rain. He swallowed and ran cautiously to the mouth of the alley, then flattened against the side of the church where he heard voices around the corner. The entrance where he had stood hardly a minute ago was only a few feet away. Are you sure? Father Dancy was saying. No question of it. It has to be the Riggs boy. Riggs, did you say? May the good Lord help him. He did tell me his name was Riggs, but it meant nothing, for I hadn't heard of him. Honestly, I can hardly believe... You can't go by the looks these days. I've seen some angel faces whose deeds would make your skin crawl. Now, stay well away from me, Father. When I go after him, I understand he has a knife. I don't want you to be too close if he turns violent. Shock held Jan motionless. Something told him he ought to run, that his very life might depend upon it. But for long seconds he was incapable of movement. Then a rippling flash of lightning restored him to his senses and spurred him to flight. It had been his intention to locate Ginny in the hope that her family could help him. But how could he do that now if he was a wanted criminal? He put Ginny out of his mind and concentrated on escape. The rain helped, for there was very little traffic on the streets at the moment, and the sidewalks were almost empty. The few people passing on foot paid no attention to him, for who looks at a running boy in the rain? But cars were another matter. Several times in the next half hour he recognized the approach of a police car by the way it crept along and made use of a spotlight. He evaded each by hiding behind the trees or shrubbery, or by slipping into an alley and hurrying into the next street. Presently the houses thinned and the street lights were left behind. Then he was on a winding dirt road, moving uncertainly through the dripping dark, while his eyes searched a little desperately for shelter. The patched blackness around him was formless, but parts of it seemed blacker than other parts, and instinctively he headed for the blackest patch of all, for it made him think of a cave. It was a cave of sorts, for entering it took him miraculously out of the rain. Then a final feeble display of lightning showed him that he was in a shed housing farm machinery. He sank down into a corner in his sodden clothes, as miserable, it seemed, as he had ever been in his life. Then he thought, "No, I've been in a worse spot than this. Much worse. 1,000 times worse. But where?" His memory carried him back only to the Glendale station. Ginny said he had been running, but he was unable to recall that part of it. Instead, his mind leaped onto their arrival at the Westlake station, and he had a sharp vision of the two determined policemen crossing the platform to the train. He hadn't the least doubt now that they had been looking for him. But how had they known that Jan Riggs, if that was his name, would be on that particular train? He hadn't known it himself until a minute or two before he went on board. Of course, someone could have spotted him at the Glendale station and told the police, and it would have only taken a quick phone call to tell the Westlake police to be on watch for him. But that sounded too easy. And what of the men in white jackets by the van? His capture must be very important to someone, to judge by all the effort being made to find him. Suddenly his wet clothing felt icy, and he began to shake with a chill. It was a dreadful feeling, made all the worse by the knowledge that there was something frightening in his life that was beyond his power to remember. The headlights of a car swept through the rain and touched the front of the shed. They wavered on the unevenness of the road, then steadied and came directly for the shed's square opening. Jan stared at them, knowing all at once how it felt to be a trapped animal. The car stopped, and abruptly he leapt to his feet and darted behind one of the pieces of machinery. Someone got out of the car, and he was astounded to hear a familiar voice call his name. It was Ginny. "Jan?" she repeated. "Jan, I know you're out here. I know you are here. Please come out. Pops and I have come to take you home." It was like a sequence in a dream. He hardly believed it, even when he stumbled from the shed, teeth chattering so that he could not speak, and glimpsed her in a rain cape with the car headlights behind her. He was so glad to see her he almost cried. Then in the next breath a tall elderly man was throwing a blanket about him and helping him into the rear of the car, where a small boy sat watching owlishly. They were well away from the shed before Jan managed to stammer. How did you find me?" "Promise you won't tell?" said Ginny. I promise." She gave a happy little laugh. "We'd have found you sooner, only we had to go home first and get Otis. Otis can find anything." And on that note, I am going to take a quick break, because I have been reading for a bit now. So, see you in a few minutes. Assuming any of this will work. So, curious what people think so far. Just checking levels again there. So let's go ahead and continue onward with Chapter 3, Wanted. The car swung past a shopping area at the edge of town, stopping briefly at a traffic light, then started cautiously down a sloping residential street where torrents of rainwater overflowed the gutters. The rain had almost stopped. Jan, peering through the car window, was startled to see a building on his left that seemed vaguely familiar. Suddenly the truth hit him. "Hey," he burst out, "I was here earlier this evening, at that church we just passed. I was talking to Father Dancy when Sergeant Bricker came, and I had to run. But I heard enough to learn I was a wanted criminal." Heron Rhodes, who had hardly spoken except for a mumble or a grunt, pulled the car to the curb and braked it. Now he said, "If you were a criminal, son, you wouldn't be confessing it quite so soon. And anyhow, Ginny would have known it. You'd be surprised how far off she can spot a phony or a rat. Did you find out why you were wanted?" I don't like that voice for him. "No, sir." "Tell me everything you said to Father Dancy, and everything you heard Bricker say about you." Jan had no trouble repeating every word of it, for it would have been impossible to forget it. Heron Rhodes grunted. "After you learned where we lived, why in double tarnation did you..." Maybe I had that right the first time. "Why in double tarnation did you run off in the opposite direction and hide?" "Well, because, I mean, if I really was as dangerous as that policeman seemed to think, I sure didn't have any business going to you and Ginny for help." The old man snorted. "I'll give you top grade for ethics and a big 0 for judgment." He looked straight into the camera. Should have hightailed it straight to the farm. We'd have picked you up on the way, and no one would have known beans about it. But now we're in for trouble." "But why, Pops?" said Ginny. "Because, Pet, we've lost some time, and I can't possibly learn all I need to know from Jan before we have Bricker to worry about." "But I still don't understand. How can Sergeant Bricker..." "Because," said Heron Rhodes, sending the car swiftly down the street, "this happens to be the only vintage rules in the country. Everybody knows it, especially the police. They know when I arrived at the station to meet you, and they know we left after all the excitement over Jan. They saw us come back to the town with Otis, and they already know we're headed for home with another person in the back seat, because we passed a cop at the top of the hill, and he waved it to me. Bricker knows Jan sat with you on the train, and that he asked the priest where you live. Won't take him long to put it all together. Then he'll be burning up the road to the farm." The car ran a red light, whirled into a highway that was fortunately empty, and began to fly. Heron Rhodes snatched up the car phone, called the number, and said, "We got him, Hecuba, and he needs hot soup and a change of clothes. Lay out some of those things you picked up for our Tremaine cousin. They ought to fit. And we'll have to work fast. That devilish Bricker has his nose on the trail, and he may be out to see us." It seemed they had gone much farther than the 5 miles the priest had mentioned, when Jan finally glimpsed the stone wall on the left. And a very long stone wall it was, for he guessed they drove beside it for at least a half-mile before Heron Road swung through an open gateway. At the end of a winding lane, the car stopped before a large, rambling old stone house, nearly hidden in the trees. A tall, white-haired woman with a green smock, who Ginny called Aunt Heck, met them at the door. She was nearly as tall as Heron Rhodes, and had the same sharp nose and lively, intent face. She gave Jan's arm a friendly squeeze, and said, "Heron, I put his things in the little bedroom off the library. Why don't you give him a change? Why don't you help him change, then bring him to the kitchen? We'll all have something to eat while we talk." Good thought. I want to give him a quick once-over anyway. "Can I watch?" said Otis, speaking for the first time. "You may not, but you may help with the questions later." Jan was thrust across a broad entrance hall, through a huge room lined with books, and onto a small bedroom dominated by a towering four-poster. An assortment of new clothing was laid out on the bed. While he stripped down and toweled dry, Heron Rhodes went over him hurriedly, prodding and tapping and then giving an occasional grunt. "You're kind of scratched up, son. That happened this evening?" "Yes, sir. I banged into a tree when I was running through the woods." Doesn't seem anything to worry about. Have you got a sore spot? Do you ache anywhere?" "No, sir." Roll your head around. That's right. Does it hurt?" "No." Seem to be in good shape. Can't even find an old bump on your noggin. Now get into some of these new jeans and let's go into the kitchen. I know you're pretty tired, but you'll feel better when you eat, and I want you to hold up till we find out all we can about you." Jan swallowed. Why are you going to all this trouble to help me? I could turn out to be something you wouldn't want around." The old man chuckled. "I doubt it. You're not what you're supposed to be, and that's enough to get me going. Anyway, I got a strong suspicion Jenny senses something in you she isn't telling. Something downright terrific. So you see, I'm all wetted up." What would be the pronunciation of that? So it's wetted, as in a whetstone, which is W-H-E-T. I've heard that pronounced different ways, too. Anyway. The kitchen was a broad, old-fashioned room, with a beamed ceiling and a fireplace large enough for him to stand in. He was facing it at a big round table by the window, eating hungrily while the others speculated about the contents of his pockets, which were being passed around. Otis, so small he had to sit on 2 cushions to reach the table, gravely followed the progress of the pearl-handled knife from one hand to the other. When the knife finally came to him, Otis scowled at it, then blinked his owlish eyes. "This ain't his knife," he declared. "He stole it." "Otis! Otis!" Hecuba Rhodes exclaimed. "That's an awful thing to say." "But it's true," Otis replied matter-of-factly. "And he stole the money, too. Ask Jenny." Ginny suppressed a giggle. "Otis is right, sort of. That isn't Jan's knife. Why, look at it, Pops." "I've been looking at it," said Heron Rhodes. "Jan would never choose a thing like that for himself. It's too big for his hand. It only has one blade, and it's sharp as a razor. It's a dangerous weapon. Only a thug would carry it." "But he stole it," Otis persisted. "Sure," said Ginny. "Just like Pop stole the gun and some food from the enemy. That time he was an escaped prisoner of war, Otis. Appropriate is a much better word to use." Okay, he appropriated it and the money because he was sort of an escaped prisoner, right? That voice went all over the place. Heron Rhodes nodded. Right, but let's not waste time with matters we already know about. It's obvious Jan escaped from somewhere, or the police wouldn't be after him. Let's get to something more important. Jan, why did you tell Father Dancy your name was Riggs? I, I don't know. It just came. Is it your name? Somehow, I don't think so. I don't like it. There has to be a reason you used it. Reason you don't like it. Hecuba Rhodes said, That's almost elemental, Heron. The name Riggs has been impressed upon him in a hateful way. It's even possible he was mistaken for someone named Riggs. Although poses another question. Although that poses another question. Why does he remember Riggs instead of his own name? Heron Rhodes nodded sagely. Very good, Doctor. I think you've hit upon something. I'd feel better, she told him, if I knew it was because of his amnesia. Evidently it wasn't physical. He shook his head. Nope, couldn't find a thing wrong with him except a few bumps and scratches acquired after leaving the train. Heron Rhodes paused. Seeing Jan's questioning look, he said, Amnesia, son, is a loss of memory. Lots of things can cause it. Bump on the head, shock, illness, mental trouble. You don't seem to have anything wrong with either your body or mind, so I'd say you'd had a shock of some kind. Now, if we can discover the cause of the shock or find out your name. Jan said, Maybe Ginny can help. It didn't take her any time to learn that I'm called Jan. Maybe if she tried for the last name. I'd better try it later, she told him. It would take too long now. First names are easy. A person is his first name, see? There's a phrase that rings in me. You hear it from the day you're born, and that's the way you think of yourself. She turned to her grandfather. Pops, why don't we try the word game with him? I just want to pause for a sec. I don't necessarily agree with the... I very much agree with a person is their name. I don't agree with... I guess I'd put it, you do hear it from the day you're born, but not necessarily because it's what people call you. Pops, why don't we try the word game with him? Regress him, Otis interrupted. Regress him. Jan looked from one to the other, bewildered. Jenny, as if sensing his confusion, giggled and said, Jan, you've fallen into the clutches of a pair of mind gobblers. That's what they've been called. Both Pops and Aunt Heck are doctors, specializing in the mind. Otis wants them to regress you. That means they'll have to hypnotize you, and then... No, he cried, springing up. No. Whoa there, Heron Rhodes said gently, rising and touching him reassuringly. You're as skittish as a young colt. Nobody in this house is going to put you under hypnosis without your permission. My word on it. Now, sit down, son, and help us get on with this before the law interrupts us. Jan sank back into his chair. Ginny said, The word game, Pops. Shall we try it? Not yet, Pet. We're on to something. Jan's as scared of hypnosis as I am of rattlesnakes. Wonder why. Anybody who's been hypnotized or has seen it done knows there's nothing to it. Why, you can't even hypnotize a person unless he's willing. Jan, why are you so afraid of it? I don't know, sir. The moment Ginny said what she did, something in my head sort of turned over. It was an awful feeling. The doctor's long fingers drummed on the table. This is getting more interesting by the minute. Hecuba, I'm wondering about the same thing you are. Why does he remember Riggs instead of his own name? I can think of some unpleasant reasons, she replied. Jan, let's go back to the station, before you and Ginny left the train. What scared you so suddenly and made you run away? Was it the sight of Sergeant Bicker coming to get you? It must have been. I mean, I just saw 2 policemen coming across the platform. One of them may have been Sergeant Bicker. I don't know what he looks like because I didn't see him close up at the church. I just heard his voice. He's a young man with a bald head, and he used to be a professional football player. Actually, he's acting as chief of police since our regular chief resigned. Now, think back carefully. Did you just have a feeling he was coming after you? Or is there something about him that frightened you? Jan closed his eyes. Again he saw the 2 uniformed figures crossing the platform. The burly one in the lead must have been the sergeant. Well, it could have been the sergeant that set me off. He walked like he meant business. He always does, said Ginny. But there was something else, Jan went on slowly. There was a white van or something on the other side of the platform, and there were some men in white jackets waiting by it. I don't know why, but it gave me a turn. I didn't notice the van, Ginny said. Too many things were happening. Did you see it, Pops? No, I had just reached the platform to meet you when Bricker yelled and started to run. Hecuba, who in the town has a white van? Oh, Carlson's Bakery has one, and I've seen Oscar Carlson use it to meet his wife when they come back shopping in the city. She paused and looked oddly at Jan. But somehow I don't believe it was a bakery van you saw. Do you? Before Jan could answer, Otis suddenly announced in a dramatic whisper, The Fuzz, he's coming up the driveway now. Chapter 4. Shock. It was beyond Jan to understand how owlish little Otis knew Bricker was arriving, but the others accepted the announcement without question. Heron Rhodes stood up quickly, snapping his fingers and scowling, then said, We better go into the library, folks. And Jan, I want you to go to bed immediately and pretend you've had it. You're exhausted and suffering from exposure. This is just a precaution in case the sergeant is all fired up about taking you to custody. Let's get a move on. Jan ran to the bedroom, threw off his shoes, and was just crawling into bed with the clothes on when he heard the chimes ring in the hall. Hecuba rose, scooped up the extra clothing from the spread, and tossed it all in the closet. Coming over to the bed, she smiled suddenly and drew the sheet up to hide the collar of his denim shirt. He may insist on seeing you, she said, so keep your shirt hidden, and suck in your cheeks so you look real sick. I'll leave the door slightly open so you can hear what's going on. She went out, leaving the door ajar, and could now hear voices in the hall. They moved into the library. Yes, Doctor, I've come for the Riggs boy, came the strong, forceful tones of Sergeant Bricker. Riggs, you say? Heron Rhodes' voice was mellow and quizzical. Dear me, I've got no one here by that name. He probably gave you some other name, being what he is, but I know you've got him. It's my duty to arrest him. Where is he? Arrest him for what? There's got to be a charge. The charge they gave me was assault and robbery. Who gave it to... Sorry. The charge they gave me was assault and robbery. Who gave it to you, Sergeant? The Glendale police, but the charge is only part of it. He escaped from one of the state institutions. Which one? Doctor, they didn't say. They just told me to get the kids. They just told me the kid's extremely dangerous, and they want him back behind bars just as quickly as possible. Sort of hush-hush, eh? Sort of, but I've run into this sort of thing before. And you don't think it smells of fish, Sergeant? Sir, I've got my duty to do, and I think you'd better turn that boy over to me immediately. Don't you realize what a danger he is to you and your family? Well, I wouldn't say that. Just staying alive in this world is a risky business. Can you give me a description of this Riggs boy? Slender, dark, kind of foreign-looking. He was wearing jeans and carrying a large pearl-handled knife and about $15 he'd stolen from a guard. Well, the boy brought home this evening looks a little like that, but I'm afraid I can't allow you to have him. He's in bed, suffering from exhaustion and exposure. Let me see him. If he's the Riggs boy, I'm placing him under arrest. Not as long as he's under my care. Surely you know your law, Sergeant. You're not allowed to touch a patient against a doctor's orders. Okay, came the hasty reply. You win on that, but at least you'll let me have a look at him, won't you? I want to be able to identify him. Of course, Hecuba Rose said sweetly, but you're not allowed to speak to him or disturb him. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am. Very well, she replied. He's in the bedroom here. Jan, chewing nervously on his knuckles while he watched the door, sank down into his pillow and closed his eyes. At the last moment he remembered to draw in on his cheeks. Evidently his appearance had the right effect, for he heard only a grunt from Sergeant Bricker, then silence. Voices, when he heard them again, came from the library. That's the Riggs boy, muttered the sergeant, a certain satisfaction in his tone. Got a glimpse of him from when he ran off the station platform. And it's the same kid Father Dancy at the little church talked to later. The kid ran down through the woods by the park, and I figured he might stop at the church when he got caught in the rain. Sergeant Bricker paused a moment, then said accusingly, Now kindly tell me why you say he isn't the Riggs boy when he told Father Dancy that Riggs was his name. Because, Herrenrode said gently, he really isn't the Riggs boy at all, in spite of what he told the priest. My sister and I examined him, and we know. We are medical specialists. The boy is confused, and he's obviously been through a shocking ordeal of some kind. And it's just as obvious that there's nothing criminal or dangerous about him. But he attacked a guard and stole self-preservation. I also once attacked a guard and appropriated certain articles to stay alive. Sergeant, there's something rotten behind all this I don't like. I don't like it at all. If you can't smell a fish by this time... Oh, I smell a fish all right, and he's lying right in yonder in that big bed. Kid's probably faking it. They warned me about him, said he was as smart and as sly as they come. They said... Sergeant, forget what they said. Just listen to me. You listen to me. I don't want to be hard-headed, but you two stuck out here in this country, lost in your research, you don't know what's going on in the world. If you could only see some of the lousy punks I've had to handle. And they all look so innocent that butter would melt in their dirty mouths. I'm trying to tell you you've got a monster on your hands. If you're fools enough to keep him for the night, don't blame me for what happens. There came the angry thump of retreating footsteps, followed the explosive slam of the heavy front door. Seconds later, Jan heard a car motor start up and roar away down the lane. Heron Rhodes called out, Jan, come on out. Everybody back to the conference table. We've got work to do. It's getting late, and Jan had been on the edge of exhaustion, but the jangling shock of Sergeant Bricker's visit had driven away all the thought of rest. As he took a seat into the kitchen, he looked uneasily at Ginny and was rewarded by a quick smile. The smile suddenly astonished him, for he had momentarily forgotten she was blind. But I'm not really blind, she reminded him, instantly picking up his thought. I'm just able to see in a different way. We, we're all sort of different here, as you'll find out. Well, you tell him, Aunt Heck. She's trying to say that you're one of us, Hecuba told him, and that you are, my dear. You fill a void that... She's trying to say that you're one of us, Hecuba told him, and you are, my dear. You fill a void that... She was interrupted by Heron Rhodes saying, First, I want everybody's impressions. Then, well, hey, what in double tarnation is Otis? Come on, said Otis, hurrying into the kitchen and climbing up on his double cushions. I was just trying to see the van. What van? The white one, the small boy said matter-of-factly, blinking owlish, as if nothing, as if looking into the distance. It was down at the end of the road, end of the lane, sort of waiting. It's gone now. I bet it wasn't the bakery van. Hecuba Rhodes commented with a lift of her eyebrows. No, it was the same one that was waiting at the station when Jenny came with Jan. Heron Rhodes scowled and drummed on the table with his long fingers. I don't like this, he muttered. I don't like it one bit. Jenny, what did you pick up from Bricker? Something about a favor, Pops. Oh, he's honest. I mean, he wouldn't take a bribe. But he's been made to feel that if he handles this right about Jan, he'll please somebody high up, and they'll do a favor for him some day. And that's not all. What's the rest of it, Pat? Jenny adjusted her dark glasses and rubbed a freckle on her cheek with a dainty finger. Pops, Jan is awfully important to somebody. But of course, it must be. Do you know why? Well, sort of. Then out with it. But I promised Jan I wouldn't. Jan? Heron Rhodes said Heron Rhodes. You tell us. But he doesn't know, Jenny wailed. Not the way he is now, and I promised him I wouldn't pry and find out. All I know is he's got something terrific. I mean, it's a dilly. He's really got 2 talents, but I don't think anyone suspects the other one. Jan gaped at her in bewilderment, and her aunt patted his shoulder reassuringly. It's all right, son, she said. All of us here have our little oddities the world doesn't know about. And of course I knew you had yours the moment I saw you. It sort of vibrates from a person, if you know what I mean. Though it does take someone like Ginny and myself to detect the vibration. So you see, you really are one of us. And especially so because you fill the dreadful void left by the loss of our cousin. Suddenly she gasped and said, Heron! What is it, Hecuba? Call Jackson Lane immediately and tell him to be here tomorrow before noon without fail. What's up? Heavens preserve us, I don't know what's up, but it just hit me like an avalanche. The back of my mind says we'll need Jackson Lane's help by noon tomorrow. Has to be something legal. I've had a feeling I ought to get Jackson in on this. He's got a couple of good Sherlocks on our staff we could start using right away. Okay. Like I said, I wanted to do some practicing with reading and speaking and just noticing a certain bit of fatigue here. Couple more pages to the next chapter. We'll see how that goes. Heron Rhodes, he's got a couple of good Sherlocks on his staff we could start using right away. Heron Rhodes reached for a telephone on the bay window behind him and dialed a number. There was no answer. He glanced at Otis. First, mumbled Otis, his mouth full of cookies. What? Ginny said, "He's trying to tell you that Mr. Lane flew to Bimini to go fishing." "Now, why in double tarnation would he do a silly thing like that when I need him? How's I'm gonna—" "Call the Zorns," Hecuba suggested. Millie is the secretary, and Billy does his legwork. They'll get him back here." They'd better," growled her brother, flipping through a phone book. While the doctor was concentrating on the phone, Jan fingered his new clothing, curious about it, and said to Ginny, "I'm afraid I'm going to cost your grandfather a lot of money. It doesn't seem right." "Oh, don't be silly. He's sure got it to spend, and there's nothing he'd rather spend it on than something like this. He just loves it." Ginny touched a freckle at the end of her nose and added, You are wondering about the Tremaine cousin." Why, yes," he admitted, again startled by the ease in which she could pick up his thoughts. It's awfully tragic," she said in a small voice. You tell him, Aunt Heck." "It's hard to talk about," Hecuba Rhodes said quietly. Poor Juan Tremaine was our last remaining relative, and we didn't even know about his existence till last summer." She shook her head, and Ginny said, My mom and Dad found out about him when they were in Switzerland doing some research for Pop. They're doctors too. They're back in Switzerland now, finishing up. Anyway, poor Juan's father died in Vietnam. Nobody even dreamed he'd left a wife and son somewhere. Pops put detectives on it right away," Jenny added. "And the first thing they learned was that the wife had died too, and nobody knew what had happened to Juan." Hecuba said, "Harry and I were wild. You see, all our abilities come from the Tremaine side of the family. Juan's father was amazingly gifted, and we were certain Juan would be too. Such gifts, my dear, too often dry up and vanish in the wrong surroundings. Many a child is born with some extraordinary ability, only to lose it by being whipped or laughed at by people who don't understand him. So what with foster homes and orphanages, we were afraid." She stopped and wiped her eyes, and Ginny said, "They found him at last. He was in some sort of orphanage near Washington. Aunt Heck went out to buy clothes for him while Pops rushed to Washington. But before Pops could get there..." There was a silence. Jan said, "What happened?" "Those stupid authorities," Hecuba Rhodes bit out. "They were transferring Juan and some of the boys to another place. They refused to hold him. Before Heron could reach Washington, there'd been trouble on the bus. It was wrecked, and Juan was killed." In the silence that followed, Jan sat with lips compressed, thinking, "How strange. Here I am wearing Juan Tremaine's clothes, sitting where he would have sat, taking his place. Why should it be this way?" His thoughts were interrupted by Heron Rhodes thrusting the phone aside and saying with relief, "Finally got to Jackson. Told him to charter a plane if he had to, but just get here on time. Wanted to know what in suffering Halifax it was all about, and I said I wouldn't know myself till tomorrow. But at this point, I'm pretty sure I do. What is it, Pops? Trouble. Just plain trouble. So we better get on with this. Let's see, where were we? We were talking about Jan's talents, Ginny said. Don't you think we better try the word game on him? May not have to, Pet. We've already used words that brought instant responses, so we know how he feels about hypnosis, the police, guards, and a white van. Now let's check over what we've learned about him. 1. He's being held prisoner in a place he hated and was afraid of. Becker mentioned a state institution, but I have a feeling it was a private one. 2. He managed to escape by attacking the guard and taking his knife and money, using some of that money to buy a ticket on the first train passing through Glendale. 3. The place he escaped from obviously wants him back badly, is willing to spend money to find him. They worked fast. Didn't take them long to find out he was headed for Westlake. By the time the train pulled into the station, they had it all set up with the police, with their own van and guards waiting. That van must have broken all records to get the station ahead of the train. Pops, what institution is near Glendale that Jan could have escaped from? Lordy, Pet, it'd be hard to say. Must be 100 between here and the city. Probably more. That many? Why, I had no idea. That takes in all sorts of small sanitariums, private hospitals, state and local institutions, and asylums. There's the state asylum near Marysville, just west of Glendale. My goodness, Jan's not crazy. Best way to describe where I grew up was near Marysville. You don't have to be crazy to be committed, just poor and different. Now, I wear pink socks all the time, don't feel right without 'em. Pink ties, too. And your Aunt Heck and I are always doing things that might cause folks to slap us into Marysville. But gosh all hemlock, they wouldn't dare. We're too rich and have too many degrees. Anyway, we wrote the latest textbook on insanity. Heron Rose paused, one long finger slowly tapping on the table. Suddenly he said, Jan's knife proves he escaped from a private asylum. No guard at Marysville would be allowed to carry a pig sticker like that one. So, tough guard, tough place. There are a couple like that near Marysville. One's an experimental place. I don't know much about it, but I don't like what I've heard. Jan could have come from there. It's a long hike from that area to the Glendale station, but Jan must have made it. He was so exhausted and hungry. Pops, Ginny interrupted, why can't he remember what happened before he got to the station? Station was his goal, Pet. Till he got there, running and hiding was all the way. It was just a continuation of the old nightmare. But the Glendale station meant the start of a new life. Now if we could just get into the matter of names, why he told the priest his name was Riggs. Regress him, Otis said eagerly. Please, Pops, regress him. I don't have a good mental image of what Otis is. Hecuba gave a sudden firm no. Then he said, Heron, I've got a suspicion Jan's already been regressed and progressed beyond endurance. What he needs now is sleep, perhaps in the morning when he's had a good rest. The world ceased to exist the moment his head touched the pillow in the great bed. Formless things that pursued him through an eternal blackness, but he did not open his eyes until a small hand shook him awake. He sat up instantly and saw Otis blinking at him. "Pop says to get dressed fast," Otis told him. "It's mighty near noon, and the fuzz is coming." Jan flew into his clothes. As he ran into the library, where Heron Rhodes and his sister stood waiting, he heard the ringing of the front chimes. "That's Bricker," Heron muttered, snapping his fingers. "Now what in triple tarnation is holding up Jackson Lane?" "People can't always do as you order," Hecuba reminded him. "Are you going to answer the door?" "No." The chimes rang again. They were followed by a heavy pounding. "Let me in, Doctor," Sergeant Bricker called sternly. "I've got a court order for that boy." At that moment, the tall clock in the library began to strike the hour. It was a deep, reverberating sound, and to Jan it was like the knell of doom. Abruptly, he ran past Heron Rhodes, whirled into the hall, and started for the kitchen with the intent of escaping by way of the rear door. But he was hardly through the hall when he was confronted by Ginny. "No," she said, spreading her arms to stop him. "No, you can't get away. There are policemen all around the house. Come back to the library. Maybe Pops can figure out something. If only Mr. Lane would come." "He's coming now," announced Otis, who had been peering through the curtains of one of the narrow hall windows. "There he is, stopping by the white van." Jan chilled. That van's out there?" "Sure. Now Mr. Lane's talking to those men who came in it. The fuzz is with them." Jan became aware of the low voices of men outside. They were approaching the door once more. Chimes rang. "Heron?" a deep voice called. "This is Jackson Lane. Can you hear me?" I hear you, Jackson," Heron Rhodes replied, swiftly crossing the hall. "I'll open up for you, but not for the police." "Heron, confound it, you can't ignore a court order. And that's not all. For the safety of your family, let the police inside. That boy's deranged. He's a monster. He's already killed 7 people. And I think I shall take another break there. So, well, I guess I have multiple reasons for stopping now. Looks like I am out of time. Um, Anyone who's been hanging out, thanks for that. And hopefully we'll pick this up sometime soon. Let's go take a stop over at Cobalt Press. This is the channel, right? Yeah. Maybe one day I'll spell Cobalt right. Today is not that day. Anyway.